Hello, my name is Pamela. I'm Jewish, and I'm going to tell you about the festival of Passover, or Pesach in Hebrew, which is a Jewish festival. It's one of three festivals that are celebrated, that are mentioned in the Torah, which is part of the Bible. So Pesach occurs usually in the spring, about the time of Easter, because the Easter Last Supper was the Passover meal. So that's the connection. And that's why Easter moves around, because it moves with the Jewish calendar. So they're always at the same time. So I am going to tell you all about all the things that I have here. But first of all, I want to tell you the story of Passover as we hear it in the Torah, in the Bible. So the story begins with Moses, and it begins when he was born, and he was living with the Israelites in Egypt. And the king of Egypt, who was Pharaoh is another word for king, the Pharaoh of that time was worried that there were too many Jews in his country, that they were going to take over the country. So he decided that what he was going to do was try and kill all the Jewish baby boys by throwing them into the river. So there was a mother called Yocheved who obviously didn't want her baby thrown into the river. So she made a basket for him, and she covered it in pitch, which is waterproof, and she floated it in the bulrushes at the side of the river. And she asked her daughter Miriam to go and look after the baby in the bulrushes. And while she was there, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe. And Pharaoh's daughter found the basket with the baby in it. And she said, I'm going to keep this baby. I'm going to draw the baby out of the water. I call him Moses, which means drawn out. And she looked around and said, where am I going to find a nurse for this baby? And Miriam said, I can find one. And she went and fetched her mother. So Moses was brought up in the royal palace with his mother, and he grew up to be a young man and a prince of Egypt. And so one day he was out walking, and he saw the Israelites were being made to work hard to build cities for Pharaoh. They were slaves, so they were working hard for no money in the heat. And it was very difficult work. And they had people called taskmasters who watched over them to make sure they were working. And one day when Moses was walking past, he noticed the taskmaster beating one of the slaves. And he got very angry. And he went to the taskmaster and he killed him. And then he realized he was in big trouble. So he ran away. And he ran out into the desert and became a shepherd. And one day, while he was looking after the sheep, he came across an extraordinary sight. He found a bush that was burning, but the fire wasn't consuming the bush. And he went closer to have a look, and this voice came out of the bush. And it said, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt to talk to Pharaoh and tell him to let the Israelite people go. So Moses said, Hi, who am I to do this? And God said, because I told you to do it. And Moses said, but I'm not a very good speaker. So God said, take your brother Aaron with you and he will help you. So Moses went back and he and Aaron went to see Pharaoh. And they said to Pharaoh, our God is very strong. And if you don't let the people go, then terrible things will happen. But Pharaoh laughed. He didn't believe this. So Moses took his stick and he threw it on the ground and it became a snake. And Pharaoh said, but my magicians can do that. And his magicians all threw their sticks on the ground and they all became snakes. But Moses' snake went and ate all the other snakes. So Pharaoh said, well, yes, I can see your God is stronger, but I'm still not going to let them go. So the next morning, when people went down to the river, which they relied on for their drink, for washing, for watering their crops, they saw that it was red like blood. And Moses went to Pharaoh and said, see, this is what happens when you don't do what God wants. And Pharaoh said, all right, I'll let them go. So of course, as soon as Moses went away, he changed his mind. And the following morning, Pharaoh woke up and there were frogs everywhere. There were frogs in his bed, and there were frogs in his breakfast, and frogs in his clothes, and everyone had frogs everywhere. And this was called a plague. And altogether there were 10 of them, because each time Pharaoh said he would let the people go and then changed his mind. So there was blood, frogs, lice, boils, cattle sickness, wild animals, locusts, hail, darkness, and the very last one, which was death of the firstborn, which meant that all the eldest children in Egyptians' families were killed. And the reason that the Israelites' children weren't killed was because God had said to Moses, tell the people to kill a lamb and put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost of the house so that the angel of death passes over the house. So that's where we get the word pass over from. So that's what they did. And then Pharaoh said for the last time, okay, let the people go, enough. So the people knew that Pharaoh still might change his mind. So they hurriedly packed everything and they made bread very quickly. Well, you have to leave bread to rise, and they didn't have time to let their bread rise. So their bread came out flat, like a flat bread. And so they had to take that with, because that's all they had, and they went and they ran until they got to the sea. And of course, Pharaoh had changed his mind, and behind them were the soldiers, and in front of them was the sea. And they said to Moses, now what? What do we do now? And Moses took his stick and held it up, and the sea parted, and the people were able to walk through the sea to the other side. And meanwhile, the sea then went back on top of all the soldiers, so that the army was not able to follow the Israelites across to the other side. So they managed to get away. And the story does go on, but that is the part of the story that we remember, is how Moses, with God's help, got the people out of Egypt and out of slavery. And one of the ways we remember that is by thinking about slavery and freedom and what it means. And one of the things that we do for Passover is to have a special meal. And the family all gets together and we sit around the table and we have special things on the table that we taste and eat. And we also have special books. I have two here. It's called a Haggadah. This one is an adult one and this one is a children's one. And if you look at the children's one, there's some lovely pictures. There's Pharaoh's daughter coming down to the water. You turn the page, you see there it is without Pharaoh's daughter, and there it is with her. And Moses moves along in his little basket on the river, and she comes to get him. So that's one of the pictures, and there's lots of other things that children might like to see, like there's the sea, and if it works, there we go, the Israelites have drowned, not the Israelites, the Egyptians drowning in the sea. So there they are, and now they've gone. So there's lots of nice pictures for children in there. But we tell the story of the Passover, and we remember this Passover through the story. And it's called Seder. The meal is called the Seder meal because Seder means order. And there's a certain order that we do things in, that we tell the story, that we eat the food. And we have this special plate called a Seder plate. And on the Seder plate, we have special items that make us think about slavery and freedom. And the first item is this egg. And eggs symbolize new life. So that's the new life of freedom. And on the egg is a burnt bit. And that symbolizes the burnt bit is like slavery. It's the bad bit. And what else do I have? I have a little lamb. You're supposed to have a lamb bone on the plate, but I've just got a lamb to signify the lamb that was killed to put the blood on the door so the angel of death passed over. We have parsley. So a green vegetable, any green vegetable will do, but we usually use parsley. And parsley is green and represents springtime and new life, so that's freedom. But we also have salt water, which you can't see here, but I do have. And salt water is like tears, because if you taste your tears, they taste salty. So salt water is the tears of slavery. And what we do is we dip the parsley of freedom into the tears of slavery to symbolise slavery and freedom there. The other thing we have on the plate is this stuff, which is called horseradish. Looks like a big parsnip. When you peel it, it's white, but it's not. It tastes much stronger. It's a very strong taste and a very strong smell, and it tastes bitter, so we call it bitter herbs. So obviously that's for slavery, the bitterness of slavery. And then we have this stuff, and this looks a bit like mud, doesn't it? And that's what it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like the mud that the Israelites made the bricks for Pharaoh's cities out of when they were slaves. But actually, tastes really nice because it's made of apples and spices and almonds and raisins and a little bit of sweet kosher wine and sugar. So it tastes very nice. So that's called haroset. And again, we eat that to remember the bricks and the slavery, but also the sweetness of freedom. So there's all these symbolic things that we eat because we remember through our taste, through our smell, and using our senses to remember all these things. We also have this, which is called Matzah, and it's a flat bread, like a cracker. So this is, you can see, it's just flat, and we eat that, and we eat those for a week. Passover lasts for a whole week, and we spend that week, we eat flatbread, but we also don't eat anything that rises. So we don't eat anything that's got yeast in it. We don't eat anything that, things like peas and beans, which swell when you put them in water. So nothing that swells, nothing that gets bigger, that rises. So there's all kinds of things that we can't eat during that week. So we have a week where we only eat special foods. So it's a way of remembering the slavery and the freedom of Passover and what it means to the Jews. You've noticed that I've been saying Israelites. Well, that's what the Jews were called in those times. They were called the Israelites only later that they became the Jews. That's why the words are interchangeable, but they're still the same. And it's still all about my history as a Jew and what it means to me. So thank you and goodbye.